Let's go back to the early 70s, late 80s real quick. Arcade games were all the rage. You had your racing games, your shoot 'em ups, your platformers, and of course one of the most popular ones, fighting games. Fighting games like Sega's 1976 title Heavyweight Champs and Atari's 1982 title Karate were amongst the first of their kind to implement the fighting styles of boxing and martial arts respectively into the video game world. And like most video game genres from this point in time, as the first wave of home consoles came out, the production of video games only increased, resulting in hundreds of fighting games especially. Some of the more notable ones were Technos Japan's Karate Champ, Nintendo's Punch-Out, Activision's Boxing, and of course Capcom's first Street Fighter. But based on my research, the golden years of fighting games were just beginning, as the 90s would end up delivering some of the best the genre had to offer, especially with the release of Street Fighter II in 1991 and Mortal Kombat in 1992, two games that were considered to be revolutionary for the world of fighting games. While Mortal Kombat was particularly known for its violence through fatalities, both this and Street Fighter especially introduced the new concept of special moves and combos that could be initiated with a series of specific button patterns that you had to experiment with. But they also offered a variety of characters that had distinguishable fighting styles and unique designs. They set a completely new bar for fighting video games that are still being followed to this day. But throughout the 90s, they would reach one of their biggest mainstream successes. Hundreds of games within this genre would be made throughout this decade, and no surprise, even dinosaurs were kind of brought into the mix of it. The most notable ones were definitely Atari's Primal Rage, DreamWorks Interactive's Warpath Jurassic Park, and who could forget the Taito classic Dino Rex. In November of 1992, Taito, a Japanese video game company, would notice the massive craze of fighting games caused by Street Fighter II, and they did what any normal video game company would do in this situation and made their own fighting game to capitalize off of the hype. At first glance, Dino Rex could have probably been a very unique and interesting take on fighting games. I mean, having huge dinosaurs fighting each other always seemed like a pretty cool concept to me, and I'm sure many others share the same sentiments. But what quickly became clear about Dino Rex is that it was a troubled game that would suffer from the unfortunate bug problems that were pretty much ignored by the developers for reasons I'll get into later in the video. But because of these bug issues, Dino Rex is now known to many for being a very difficult, not very fun, piss-poor attempt at being a fighting game. Though I will say the game does have some aspects to it that make it funny and frankly kind of amazing in my book. But first, we should probably go over the game's history. The game's director and planner would be a man named Takatsuna Senba, and as you could expect with him being the director and everything, he was one of the people that were sort of responsible for the poor state of the game that would be released back in 1992, but we'll get to that. Takatsuna didn't actually start off in the gaming industry. He got his start in entertainment doing freelance work starting at the age of 18. He typically dabbled in art and illustrated for different production studios for the anime industry here and there. And from the sounds of it, during one interview he gave back in 2001, it seems like he pretty much just fell into doing anime. And it's kind of funny because he didn't really have a desire to do animation at all. When he finished up high school, he had an interest in film and saw anime as an outlet to get into that area of the industry, so he took up freelance work at first, which would land him a job working as a key animator for a movie called Char's Counterattack to help ease the workload of the understaffed employees who were already working on it. He was tasked to draw beam and funnel animations, and one of the people who were working on the film as well, Hidetoshi Omori, who's done tons of animation work for a lot of anime projects, noticed Takatsuna's work and drive and offered him another position as one of the art directors for one of the scenes in the movie. Takatsuna would take the job, but would contact Omori regularly to consult him on certain parts of the project before one day Omori kind of just just stopped answering him. Apparently, he and many others ended up quitting the project, leaving Takatsuna all alone to work with the majority of the anime scenes he was enlisted to direct. But with the help of those that stayed behind and just being good at what he does, they completed the scene. After this, he would manage to land a couple more job opportunities drawing for other animes, but he would end up working himself to the bone, to the point where he detached his elbow and later on began to lose the ability to move his fingers from drawing too much. So to alleviate some of this pain, he would quit working for anime and instead chose to look for something that didn't involve drawing and saw an opportunity to join the video game company Taito. His initial idea was that he was going to join Taito as a game planner, but one thing led to another and he ended up literally back on the drawing board designing sprites and graphics for upcoming games. But as time went on, he would be given more and more responsibilities, and through this he got a chance to see how games were made. He ended up doing a lot of miscellaneous work, but he helped out on a lot of Taito titles like Masters of Weapon, The Majestic 12, Gun Frontier, Metal Black, and of course Dino Rex. In fact, Dino Rex was one of the first games that Takatsuna would work on for Taito, and as a director and planner too, surprisingly. He was working on that at the same time he was working on Metal Black, and this is where some of the problems with Dino Rex's development would start. There were actually quite a few factors that played into why this game didn't come out very clean. First off, they were given about 3 months to make the game, which may be a standard time frame for games back in the 90s, I don't fully know though, don't quote me on that. But you have to remember they were working on 2 games at once, so their focus wasn't completely on Dino Rex all the time. And even when they did finish Metal Black, Taito was already preparing to start the planning stages for a new shooting game on a different hardware board called the F3. That's the name of the hardware board, not the game. The game that they were planning on working on was a Gun Frontier game. At the time that they were making Dino Rex, they were using the F2 hardware board, which allowed the team to do a lot for the game, but it was being pushed to its limits. When Takatsuna first started working on Dino Rex, it wasn't even going to be a fighting game at all, but rather a helicopter shoot 'em up. But again, the fighting craze that was further popularized by Street Fighter II would influence Taito and Takatsuna to change it to something that was less about shooting and more about hitting. So he created a game about dinosaurs fighting each other, which was under the working title of Project D-Rex. And it somewhat makes sense why they choose dinosaurs for the game, as this was also around the same time a dinosaur hype was kind of forming, but surprisingly they would kind of be early for it. I don't know if they maybe foreshadowed it, or maybe they caught wind of a certain upcoming American film that also featured dinosaurs, or maybe they thought dinosaurs would appeal well for American and European audiences given our long line of history with dinosaurs in media, or maybe Takatsuna himself liked the idea of a dinosaur game. He said that along with being influenced by Street Fighter II's success, his other influences for the game, more specifically the dinosaurs in the game, came from the Bullmark brand monster toys he used to play with as a kid. And while it's never said outright, given the stop motion animated look the dinosaurs have when they move around on screen, and of course their overall old school designs, I think it's safe to say that older dinosaur films, like those with stop-motion dinosaurs made from Ray Harryhausen, were a big influence to the dinosaurs look in this game. This is something that's been pointed out by many who are familiar with Dino Rex. According to Takatsuna, the animation was all done with real models. There was a lot of uncertainty about the potential of CG in the game industry at the time, and whether it could deliver as a new way of making characters. We pushed the F2 board as far as it could go. Apparently, the team ended up having some extra ROM capacity that they decided to take advantage of to create their small roster of characters through means of scanning and digitizing physical puppets and models of them, which they would take shots of in a blackout tent that was set up in the corner of the room. Pretty neat. There are a lot of interesting aspects to the dinosaurs, but there's also a lot of weird aspects to them as well. First off, that T-Rex looks hilariously obese and purple. Second off, the ceratopsid dinosaurs do this really weird bipedal run move that looks so out of place. Third, the Pachycephalosaurus makes this really annoying screeching sound that makes you want to punch a bird. Fourth, the Allosaurus has this cheetah roar that also sounds kind of annoying. but it's not as annoying as the Pachycephalosaurus and the Stygimoloch screeches. And lastly, the Ceratosaurus has this weird inflatable dewlap when it roars in victory. Another really weird thing about the dinosaurs is that in this game, for whatever reason, they aren't able to turn around. Every time the dinosaurs jump or roll or run past each other, the game automatically repositions them to face each other from the positions they started out in, instead of letting you turn around to attack your opponent from behind. It's a really weird detail to add into the game, but there was a reason for it. Takatsuna admits their understanding of fighting games at the time was pretty shallow, and there was an issue where it was hard to tell which player was which during fights as the dinosaurs looked too similar to each other. So, instead of, I guess, making the dinosaurs more distinct, they just made it so that every time they ran past each other, the game just repositions them automatically. Real quick, I just want to clarify because I didn't make it clear the first time around. Takatsuna said the dinosaurs were hard to tell apart if the player or players picked the exact same dinosaur as each other or their opponents. So if both players picked a Ceratosaurus or a Triceratops or any other dinosaur, it would be hard to tell which player was which, so that's why the automatic repositioning was put in place for it. The first time around, I made it seem like no matter what dinosaur you were going up against, it would be hard to tell who was who, as if a normal functioning human couldn't tell the difference between a Triceratops and obese Barney over here. Along with this, because the builds for the dinosaur characters were different than typical fighting games, different fighting maneuvers and control methods had to be implemented to accommodate for their body shape. And as you can already tell, it results in very awkward movements. But these were just minor issues with the game in comparison to some of the bug problems it ended up having. One of the most criticized things about this game when it was first released was a hit detection bug, which basically meant that sometimes when you hit your opponent, the game would count it as a miss, and the CPUs were already considered to be overpowered. So that, on top of this very obvious disadvantage the bug made for players, it made the game very difficult to play. On top of that, there were just general issues like the dinosaurs being too awkward to maneuver due to the difficult control system. The attacks sometimes weren't even responsive, and if they were, they felt delayed. And there really wasn't any kind of depth to the game that other fighting games at the time had. This new standard for fighting games had been well set at this point, and Dino Rex was performing under that standard. Apparently, when it came to the game's control system, in the early stages of its development, the team was only allowed to use 2 buttons for the control, which seemed to be the standard for arcade games, but when Street Fighter 2 came out, it had a completely different layout, having 6 buttons instead of 2. And due to its increasing popularity, American audiences especially quickly became used to the 6-button layout. So yeah, to put it simply, there were quite a few problems with this game. But it wasn't too late. Taito could fix some parts of their game and give arcade goers a better playing experience. Unfortunately, that's not how things panned out according to Takatsuna. First of all, they didn't even find out about the game's bug until about a year after they had launched it. Which might sound surprising, like how did they manage to let that slip, but because they were focused on 2 games at the same time, the team had completely overlooked the bug. And when Taito did eventually find out about the game's problem, they ordered Takatsuna to retrieve it back from their subcontractor to get the game recoded. Second of all, this wasn't an easy thing to do, because recoding a game like this for big fixes wasn't an overnight task. This was going to take some time to fix, and on top of trying to fix Dino Rex, Taito expected Takatsuni and his team to be on top of their current video game projects as well. So their focus wasn't fully on this recode, and when they did manage to make things better, they ended up finding even more problems towards the end of its development process. I think it had something to do with the delayed hit detection for the dinosaurs, and they were given more time to correct these mistakes as well, but at that point, Takatsuna was just kinda over it, and decided to ignore the problems, something that he admits he regrets doing today. But in that 2001 interview, according to his words, no matter how long we extend this development, the more we play, the more bugs we're going to find. He actually ends up going a little bit more in detail about the issues and his thoughts on it nowadays on his personal blog. The posts are typically in Japanese, so the translation might be a bit off. But this is what he had to say about Dino Rex as recent as 2021. Dino Rex is, in a word, a defective product. The underlying problem actually had a bug where the hit check was delayed by 1/60th of a second relative to the picture. This was brought up in-house, and after a while, Mr. T, a new programmer, pointed it out, and we also received reports from the outsourcing company. However, if I were to fix it, it would take a long time to remake it from scratch. So with the schedule that can only be extended by 1 month, my judgment was dull, and I wondered if I could somehow cover it up with animation. I devised it, but it didn't work. The reason I didn't mention this until now is because I was suffering because I couldn't say that it was an unfinished product or a failure when there were users who bought it. However, I recently realized that my experience at Taito was traumatic for me, and I've come to think that I want the statute of limitations to expire. It's clear that Takatsuna has a lot of regret when it comes to the game's issues, and in a way I feel bad for the guy, considering what was being asked of him by Taito. At the same time, if you're going into the industry where you're going to create any kind of media, people are going to criticize it. In the case of Dino Rex, a lot of the criticism was pretty valid, I'd say, given the circumstances. But surely there's more to the game than just these issues, right? Well, let's take a look at the game itself and its story. The story for Dino Rex is pretty simple. It starts off with a segment of text giving us a quick rundown of what the game is all about. It explains that based on some clay artifacts found in South America, there is evidence that proves that humans and dinosaurs once coexisted together around 25th century BC in a region called Amazonia. Fun fact, the clay artifact that appears on the loading screen was actually made by one of Takatsuna's female staff members who left it on his desk. Apparently, when people around the office asked him about it, he trolled a little bit and would tell them that he got it on a vacation trip that he took to South America. But of course, that was a lie, because this dude barely knows what the definition of a vacation is, as at that point he hadn't taken one in like 2 straight years. But hey, hard workers like him need to have a little fun every now and again, and sometimes that means doing a bit of trolling to your coworkers. The game continues to explain that at this point in time, the world was controlled by Amazons, where they have this annual event where men from other tribes fight for the throne as the titular king, the Dino Rex, and who would achieve this reward was determined based on who had the strongest dinosaur. Every year, the men from these different tribes entered their dinosaurs into a battle of the death to work up the ranks towards the final goal. As you progress through the ranks and the regions, the story briefly introduces the other tribes that don't really play a huge role in the game, but since they're there, I might as well mention them. In terms of the controls, like I mentioned earlier, there were 2 of them. One is for punching and biting, I believe, and the other is for kicking and tail swiping, I think. But if you press both of them at the same time, you initiate the dinosaur's combo move, which basically means you can rush your opponent and just rain attacks down on it and deal a lot of damage to them. Every dinosaur has their own unique combo animation and attacks, and it's really satisfying when you're actually able to properly hit the CPUs with it, which if you're like me and completely suck at this game, that can be a very rare occurrence. And that's pretty much it. Your objective is very simple. You select your dinosaur and beat your opponent. Of course, in this case, it's definitely one of those things that are easier said than done, considering the game's issues, but it's not impossible. Unfortunately for me, it is, because on top of having this disadvantage of difficult controls and bad hit detection bugs, I just generally suck at video games. And this is not a self-deprecating joke. I know, press F in the chat, boys. I'm not a real gamer. That's a skill issue I'm willing to accept. Okay, so full disclosure, I did try to record my own footage of this game because it is available online. You can find that link in the description below if you want to try to play it yourself. But because I was so bad at the game and like actually could not progress through it because I'm just that bad at it, I decided to just give up. And the video will now be spliced between my own video game footage and footage from some cool ass people who actually beat the game and have videos on their own channels of them them doing so. So go check those guys out after this video if you want a better look at the stages themselves. Anyways, let's get to the game. You basically just go down the list of all of the dinosaurs in the game. First, you fight an allosaur, and when you beat that, you then make your way to the monoclonius, who does this really funny run at you that I really like despite how goofy it looks. I mean, look at this shit. That's kind of terrifying, I'm not gonna lie. It's also kind of funny. After you manage to beat up these two hooligans, a different game mode will appear, where you play as your dinosaur in a modern city that you have to basically destroy. Story-wise, the explanation for why this mode exists is that it's a dream your character is having. Gameplay-wise, it just serves as a bonus stage that basically has its own little side story going on. Basically, as you're destroying the city, biting helicopters, and stomping on police officers, you're also hunting for a man named Mr. Ho Lee. Once you pass the stage, a quick segment will play out showing Mr. Lee on TV, with captions saying that he's basically preparing an army to protect his city. When that stage ends, you continue your fighting spree with the next dinosaur on the list, the very annoying Pachycephalosaurus. This was one of the stages I struggled so hard on. I am not exaggerating when I say I must have tried and failed fighting this smug piece of shit dinosaur like 15 times, probably more. And when I finally beat it, I was so happy to progress to the next stage where we have to battle the Ceratosaur next. And when I get to that stage, I pretty much die almost immediately and lose the entire game, meaning that all of my progress from that point on was just gone. After that, I just shut off the game and cried in a corner for a little bit. But with the power of using other people's footage, I can show you guys what lies beyond this point, because I sure as hell wasn't going through that mess again. So after you beat the shit out of the Ceratosaur, you enter the second bonus stage, where you're back in the city, but this time you're battling the army, destroying jets, stomping on soldiers, and flipping tanks before you go up against Mr. Ho Lee again, who tries to fight you off in an excavator. Once you beat him and destroy his building, you move on to the next stage where you have to fight off Stygimoloch next, and then after that, Triceratops. So there are points in the game where if one of the two dinosaurs are down, the opponent has the opportunity to go over to that dinosaur and rain down attacks as they're down. And as you can already expect, each dinosaur has their own unique animation for this. What's weird about the Triceratops animation is that it looks like it's humping the dinosaurs when they go down, which is just a sight I didn't expect to see today. It's almost as weird as this fat fucking T-Rex body slamming the everlasting shit out of any poor dinosaur that's dumb enough to get in the way of its combo power attack. Anyways, after you beat the Triceratops, now it's on to the next and final bonus stage, where we go back to a modern day world that's been ravaged by your dinosaur. What's left is a post-apocalyptic-like setting where cavemen who used to be civilians of the once standing city fight against you using catapults and spears. At the very end of the stage, you find Mr. Ho Lee bowing to you next to a pile of gold without any pants on for some reason. And if you attack his pile of gold, he waves a suitcase full of cash around, probably in the same vein as waving a white flag in defeat. The stage ends after you destroy the last of his building, where you're thrown back into the main story to fight the final dinosaur boss, a golden Tyrannosaurus, which takes place in Ollantaytambo, which is actually a real place in South America. So like I explained earlier, every dinosaur that's fighting had been entered into the competition by their trainer, and in every single battle, the loser of the fight gets eaten or taken away by a pterosaur. In this final battle with the golden T-Rex, you are actually fighting against the dinosaur that belongs to the Dino Rex king himself. And if you beat his dinosaur, the pterosaur will swoop down towards him, but instead of eating him or carrying him away, not that it could because look at the size of this motherfucker, the pterosaur ignores him and your human character is thrown into a sudden death one-on-one match with the Dino Rex king, in a scenario that Takatsuna confirmed was a straight parody of Street Fighter 2. If you manage to beat him, the pterosaur will muster up enough strength to carry his fat ass off into the distance, and you obtain the title as the new Dino Rex king. Oh yeah, and when you win, you unmask yourself. And for those of you that are actually well versed with Taito games will know that this player is a reused character known as Rastin, who's from one of their previous games with the same name, so, an interesting little reference right there. The game ends with a final segment explaining that as time went on, the dinosaurs would mysteriously disappear, along with all of the tribes that trained them in battle. But one man who claimed to be a descendant of the tribes that used to live in this region with the dinosaurs said, "All became leaves of the jungle," before cutting to the credits and this really funny montage of all of the dinosaurs running. I am not even joking. This is what the game ends on, and this game has been around for a little over 3 decades, and no one has memed on this yet. That's crazy to me. The dinosaur running animations look so goofy, I fucking love it. At the end of the montage, we see Mr. Ho Lee again waving around his empty suitcase, who takes cover at the incoming stampede of dinosaurs, and just when he thinks he's made it out, a pterosaur lays an egg, which hits him square on the head before finally ending. Well, that was very weird, but that was Dino Rex, a game that exists. Now, while I personally can't judge the game too hard since I didn't even finish it, my quick impressions of it is that it's not a very fun game, at least not to me. Maybe someone might like the extra challenge of the difficult control system and overpowered CPUs, but personally, it's just not for me. Like I said earlier, it's possible that it's just me being really bad at the game. I was never really one to get into fighting games that much, at least not enough to ever get good at it. But some of it might also have to do with the fact that I played it on an online emulator that maybe has its own issues with the game. I don't really know. That being said, there are some cool aspects to the game. Personally, I think the art and background design is done pretty well. As you're fighting, a lot of things play out in the background that features other dinosaurs, and there are structures that you and your opponent can crash into, and so on. The dinosaur animations are also just really funny to me, like the T-Rex body slamming, the weird ceratopsid run and hump, and the score for the game is actually really catchy. But yeah, that's pretty much the extent of my personal thoughts with it. With that out of the way, what would become of the game and Takatsuna? Well, as far as Takatsuna goes, he would eventually quit working for Taito due to family reasons, and according to his blog, on the day he went to hand in his letter of resignation, he also sent the last of Dino Rex's specifications in the hopes that some higher up in the company would read it and maybe use it to improve the game. But as you can already tell, that never happened. Despite the struggles with Dino Rex, Takatsuna did say that he liked working at Taito, and after he left, he was contacted by a couple of other companies like Sega and Sony that offered him some work. But nothing too permanent. He would coast around and even teach some college courses, but we don't see him around too much these days, it seems. Of course, he has his blog site where he gives minor updates on his life here and there, but aside from that, it seems that he's kept a low profile, at least from what I've seen. In regards to the game, it would kind of fall into obscurity, especially since it didn't do well at all with American or European audiences, as Tamco, Taito's sales agent in America, went bankrupt, and as a result, they would lose their whole sales network. So as a backup, they would retool the game to appeal better for Japanese markets. Whether the game did any better domestically, I don't really know, but the game would make a reappearance in Taito Memories 2 Jukin for the PS2. Taito Memories is a video game compilation series that gathered a bunch of Taito's classics into one collection that was sold exclusively in Japan. And Dino Rex featured in the 4th collection that was released on January 25th, 2007. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the only console release Dino Rex would ever get, which probably says a lot about how well it's held up with people. That being said, if you look up the game now, it says that 80% of Google users actually like it. So maybe it held up better than I initially thought. I mean, it's either that, or people just really like dinosaur games or are praising it for nostalgic purposes. But in terms of the general criticism of the game, it's pretty much everything that I already mentioned before. You know, difficult controls, twitchy animations, but also weird sound effects. Some didn't like the dinosaur designs or colors. And of course, the biggest criticism, the unmatched battles between you and the much more calculated CPUs. That being said, the game does get some praise for some of its absurdity. The weird dinosaur animations, although janky, are very funny, and if you're unfamiliar with the game, watching these dinosaurs run or jump or do anything for the first time will catch you so hard by surprise. While some criticize the dinosaurs' designs and colors, others seem to appreciate the homage the dinosaurs paid to those older stop-motion films. With this, it's clear that Dino Rex had potential, as the concept of a dinosaur fighting game didn't seem like anything anyone was really opposed of. It serves as a way to continue to teach people that a good concept is wasted with poor execution. Thank you all so much for watching, and please, have a nice day.